Welcome to the 11 o'clock hour with your host, Sierra Claire, where global perspectives meet local politics. We cover major trends shaping the latest geopolitical battles, the local fraud costing taxpayers millions, and everything in between. We track the trends mainstream media misses, bring you guests with the experience to break down key stories and connect the dots. And we ask the most important questions so you always stay ahead of what matters. This is your 11 o'clock hour, and these are the stories you don't want to miss. Welcome back to the 11 o'clock hour. I'm your host, Sierra Claire. In this week's second episode, we're talking about the threat we face from the cartels, how Trump is deploying the military on the southern border and in our hemisphere in order to protect us, and other important military policy changes with expert and former Green Beret John Frankman, who's running for Congress in Florida's 1st District. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Sierra. I appreciate it.
So first, let's talk about the increased political violence and the threat environment this president is facing. I have to start with this question because of what happened over the weekend. You know, as somebody with security and military experience, what changes do you think should be made to the president's security plan in order to ensure his safety? And do you believe the threat the president is facing is more than any random nut job from either side of the political aisle? Isn't it clear this violence is coming from one side?
Well, it certainly is the left that is kind of pushing for violence. They're doing it in their rhetoric. They don't really play by the same rules. I think more conservatives that we understand that there's a rule of law and we try to abide by it. When we want change, we go through the system, the process. But because there's just a different moral standard, they're willing to just get whatever they need through whatever power means. So I think it certainly is from the left wing. Now, if is it the individual alone? That's tough to tell, because you kind of wonder, how does a school teacher from California who probably doesn't have a lot of military experience get that close to a president? Yeah, same thing, getting on the roof back in Pennsylvania, in Butler, Pennsylvania. So they're really, and we're still waiting to hear about that investigation. So I think there just needs to be a whole lot more clarity on what's happened in these security breaches with President Trump. And I would certainly think, you know, if it happens once, that's probably enough of a reason to have the whole leadership change to make sure that there's absolutely no threat around the president.
Absolutely.
You can sweep the entire area. You should sweep the entire area. You should have already known and suspected that there are people staying in the hotel. So it seems very surprising to me that someone would be able to get that close to the president with those weapons.
Yes. Well, those are all good points. And exactly what you said. We need answers to these questions, and we need more transparency about these investigations. I totally agree. Let's turn to foreign affairs. There's so much going on right now with Iran and the Middle East. Americans forget that our military is conducting operations right here in our own hemisphere. We're fighting against drug cartels that have been designated as foreign terrorist organizations. The United States military is striking drug boats headed to our shores in the seas, and they're also operating in Mexico and may potentially conduct strikes in other South American countries like Colombia. What are the considerations for an operation in Mexico when we're coordinating with the Mexican government and authorities?
Well, I think the consideration you have to have is who is our ally and how much we trust those allies, because the cartels have, they're an insurgent force. And what an insurgency does is it tries to delegitimize the other governmental force in which it's operating. We saw that with the Taliban. They were creating an alternative government, and a lot of people would go towards the Taliban because even if they didn't like them, they at least provided some kind of stability, some kind of structure, law, rule of order. And when you have the cartels that are so powerful and have infiltrated so many levels of the Mexican government, it sometimes is better and easier to just go along with them to get along and to survive and to move forward, as difficult as that is. And I think seeing El Chapo's son, I know this was years, decades ago being released, that kind of shows the level of power that they have. So
Mhm.
I think just knowing who your allies are, and that's going to have to do with information sharing.
Mm.
And if they're not, if you can't be sure that they're on board with the objectives that we have, working with them is different. So how do you get to our interest, which is getting rid of the cartels, making sure drugs don't flow within the United States? What's the best mechanism of getting that? And even though we've been working with the Mexicans for a very long time, I was at 7 Special Forces Group, and we had different detachments that would train with them. They'd come up to Eglin, they'd train here, they'd go down to Mexico and train with them there. That's a good way to kind of build those partnerships, but you kind of don't give them the full level of training that you have.
Right.
And you kind of weigh out, who are these more legitimate units and services. So if there were to be any kind of strikes that we conduct down there, I'd be very, very hesitant to put the lives of Green Berets actually, or other special operators at risk there, in kinetic strikes. It's just a bad look when you have any kind of civilian casualties. And I think that there's other ways of kind of getting after it. I think closing the border wall, completing the border wall has to be a number one priority. And it's kind of crazy. We're not really talking about it. We're happy that the numbers are down, but we need to make sure that this isn't just some kind of a pause right now while Trump is president, where the flow is going to come in. And I'm more concerned about the tens of millions of illegal immigrants that came to our country under Biden than I am about the Mexicans and other narco terrorists that are south of our border. Whereas if we had a border wall, able to kind of secure that, then we wouldn't really have to worry about more threat coming in, but we need to worry about the threat that's within the country right now as well.
Absolutely. Well, that is a critical point. As you said, we're all watching this. We know the risk is that when Trump leaves, all of this goes away. We go right back to the status quo of millions of people flowing over the border. This needs to get done before the end of President Trump's term. You mentioned this, that the Mexican government officials are often compromised by cartels. So, how dangerous is it for our operators to conduct coordinated raids? And what type of intelligence gathering capabilities do we have to collect on cartels and then verify the intelligence that we may be getting from our partners?
I'm trying to think of the way I can say that, right now without getting too secretive. But I think that you could always get signal information. You can, if you're using satellites and collecting information electronically, you can have some human information intelligence. If you get to know people and they share information with you, obviously, yeah. So there's certain things that you can certainly do. Again, just trying to tiptoe around that, but it's not that you can't necessarily verify. Maybe it's just how many sources do you verify it with? Is it just one person telling you? Can you also confirm it with satellite imagery? So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, those are some good points. And, hopefully the fact that this is closer to home, could make some of those processes easier. But as you said, I think there are a lot of other threats that are inside our own country that we need to focus on. Do you believe that military approach, whatever that may look like, is the best and most effective way to stop the threat of cartels at our border? We also know, and you kind of were talking about this, we also know that the cartels, they're already in our own borders, and they've even attempted to gain influence in border cities. I know from living in San Diego and Los Angeles, they're infiltrating various levels of local government and, possibly police. Is stopping these people in their home country going to protect us? Do we need to stop these people who are already here? What does that look like?
I mean, I think that the priority needs to be domestic, just period. I think you finish the border wall. Like, thank God that there aren't more people who are flowing into the country right now. But I think that we assist in deporting whatever illegals that we have here. And I think that Congress really has to step it up. And I think that Trump, through executive order, has really been leading the charge. But there's a number of things that Congress could do to more strictly enforce laws where employers can't employ illegals, where they cannot house people. If you own a home, you can't rent or house them. You could do different things, targeting bank accounts, where if you're not able to get cash, how are you going to stay here? So I would encourage self-deportations. to a much greater extent. And it's absolutely awful and unfortunate for the everybody who came here did so illegally, right? So what they did was wrong, but it is unfortunate for those who did so thinking it was somehow going to be okay.
Mm.
And it's just unfortunate that globalists and Democrats use illegals as political pawns in order to get more votes. Just totally unfortunate. But we have to take care of our country. We're $39 trillion in debt. Illegals cost billions of dollars, and they pose a threat. So I think you kind of push for the self deportations, but also then flexing those resources that we might be doing down in Central South America, Mexico, flex those resources here domestically in the United States.
Yeah. Well, I love what you brought up is there's been states who have started initiatives of just basically making it impossible for people to be illegal. They can't rent, they can't, as you said, access bank accounts, all of these things. I mean, I know my experience living in France, opening a bank account was the hardest thing, and I was there on a legal visa from the actual French government. So, and it still took months to open an actual bank account, which I needed to get paid. So then I wasn't getting paid, and I couldn't have a bank account anyway. But
Yeah.
if that's possible to do, France is doing it. Why are we not doing that here?
I'm surprised to hear that France is doing it. I think that they have a much larger illegal immigrant problem than we do.
They do, yes. They probably is a totally different experience for if you're an illegal immigrant. But anyway, we've seen a change in policy from President Trump and his team to empower our military and redirect resources closer to home to defend our hemisphere. Can you talk about how policy changes that empower our warfighters have made these types of military operations less dangerous for U.S. soldiers to execute, as compared to maybe your time in the military under Democrat leadership like Biden, who definitely did not support people in the field? And how has the mission to defend things closer to home increased the morale of our forces?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the national defense strategy, it has much more of a Western hemispheric approach. We were also told that we wouldn't really get into any of these forever wars, which, hopefully with Iran, it doesn't endure for too long.
Yeah.
I'm hoping for a speedy return there. But, I didn't have any combat deployments. I certainly trained, but I heard a lot of stories, and I heard about people in Syria who, when they're getting shot at, they're not allowed to shoot back unless actually struck or something absurd like that with regards to the rules of engagement.
Wow.
And I heard that between even Obama to his second term to Trump's term, where a lot of the rules of engagement in Iraq or Afghanistan were lifted, which gives service members much more flexibility in getting their job done. You hear these horror stories of a sniper wanting to take a shot and having to go up to a 2-star level to get permission because there's so much kind of risk aversion. And I think that's what we heard about with Abbey Gate. But I certainly think that obviously recruiting numbers speak for itself. People are just happier serving under Trump. I remember getting to 7th group and encountering a transgender officer who I did not call ma'am. I just did rank and last name to try to be courteous, but also not violate my own moral principles.
Yeah.
So just a lot of that nonsense being out there, period, having greater capability or ability and permission to just go and do your job, knowing that Secretary of War has our back if there ever is that kind of confusion, because war, it's dirty, it's gross. Sometimes you can't necessarily be sure of who's right or wrong, but I would like to take the side of the service member whenever there's kind of doubt. Now, obviously, straight up war crime, sorry, we can't help you there, but kind of having that back. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, and we want to make sure that, we're following our morals as a nation, certainly. But I think it's helpful to see this departure that now we're following our own morals. We're not worried about morals from every, random person, and especially amoral organizations like the UN. So you're an expert and a leader in fighting back against harmful policies that weaken the personal freedoms and authority of our highly trained military personnel, such as special forces. You've led the charge against Biden's draconian vaccine mandates for military members. And we saw a huge loss in talent, experience, and highly valuable military assets who were forced to leave the force by Biden. What can you tell us about how that affected our national security?
I mean, it was absolutely awful, and it divided the force.
Mm,
What communists, what Marxists do is they do divide along ideological lines. They create different classes of system, and we're seeing even different styles or types of division. They're coming up with transgender as one, and then kind of just heteronormative or straight as another, and then unvaccinated and vaccinated. And we saw that kind of
mm,
repercussion. But you had nearly 100,000 people who were forced out of the military for not getting the COVID shot. Now,
wow.
the number you usually hear is 8,600. Now, that is the number of people who were straight up kicked out. That's
Mm,
people whose exemptions were either denied or who never put an exemption in, so they were just kicked out. You had
okay.
others, such as myself, who were quote unquote voluntarily separated,
Mm,
who basically lost out on career opportunities and chose to leave rather than wait to get kicked out. So
mm,
that's just a huge loss of numbers, talent, training, etc., just in and of itself when you just look at the sheer numbers. There's also a moral element that's necessary in the military because you often are overseas in difficult situations given moral quandaries, and you have to make the proper decision. So when you eradicate that kind of level or caliber person who has that kind of moral aversion, who is critically thinking, who was
mm,
able to recognize that the order was unlawful. And Secretary Hegseth, he said that the order was unlawful. It's because there was no FDA approved drug available.
mm,
And the manner of trying to push people to get it was draconian itself. The other harm that it's done to the military, apart from kind of rooting out numbers of personnel who are trained, weakening the moral capacity of the force because now you don't have the morally upright ones, but all the flag officers are still in. They all towed the line in COVID. Some of the highest ranking people, they're still in there. But you also have the vaccine injuries, and you can't deny the science at this point and not say that the COVID shot caused a number of injuries, more injuries than any shot that we've ever seen before.
yeah.
So it just did terrible damage to the military, and I don't know if we'll fully understand it until more of the kind of COVID side effects come out, and also until we get to the next moral quandrum,
Mhm,
uh,
yeah.
difficulty, and then see how the force reacts.
Wow. That's a really good point. I haven't heard that talked about a lot, that these critical thinkers, people who cared about right from wrong, those were the people who were kicked out. And yeah, that's a huge problem.
And
Um,
then Oh yeah,
mm,
and to comment on it, and I have a number of friends who are working on the reinstatement who didn't get the shot. They're back in now,
mm,
and one of the difficulties that they say is that they're even looked at kind of as black sheep to some extent, even just within the Pentagon, because to a lot of the flag officers there, they still don't understand why it was unlawful. They
mm,
still think, hey, these are just a bunch of rule breakers who are allowed to stay around because they're probably more politically aligned with this current president.
mm,
Um, we we need to learn the lesson. I mean, I think accountability is what's the most necessary thing here, but we need to learn the lesson of what happened so that when there are other unlawful orders given in the future,
mhm.
people know what is proper to do, not the unlawful orders that the Democrat senators, congressmen talked about and made a video about, but the legitimate, tangible, unlawful orders that was given to the entire military.
Right. Well, that kind of goes into my next question is where are we at with the current efforts to remedy what happened? There are some reinstatement efforts underway, but I haven't really heard much about it. What's going on with that?
So they have task force to help with the reinstatement process. And in a perfect world, you wouldn't even need the task force. You would just hope that every level of the Pentagon of leadership would be on board and trying to reinstate. But really, these people are helping out, finding just the case by case situation
Mm,
and trying to get the service members who were forced out the kind of relief that they deserve.
mm,
And I gave the number 100,000. Now, that's not exact. I'm not exactly sure. That's estimated based on the tens of thousands that were forced out and some of the lawsuits that I've been following. And unfortunately, a lot of the data that they don't want you to track isn't tracked.
mm,
But of that number, only 150 or so have been reinstated so far. That's the number. So if you think about it, for every 1,000 people that's been forced out, only 1.5 has come back in. Why is that? It's because the process is overly complicated, it's overly bureaucratic.
mm,
Full back pay isn't actually a thing. The back pay you're supposed to get is subtracted from everything you made as a civilian from the day you were kicked out. And then those who voluntarily separated aren't necessarily entitled to any back pay.
mm,
So if you, such as myself, was considered voluntarily separated, where you chose to leave rather than wait to get kicked out, even though you were going to get kicked out regardless, you wouldn't be entitled to any back pay. And then there's no accountability. And what a lot of these people want more than anything is for those tyrannical leaders who broke the law and made everybody's lives living hell to be punished.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, absolutely. And as you said, the people who were quote unquote voluntarily were leaving, they were just trying to protect their career and, whatever they were going to need to do next to pay their bills,
right,
so that they didn't have a bad mark on their record. So yeah, that's there needs to be accountability for that for sure. In your campaign, you've spoken about the need for the Republican Party to embrace grassroots candidates rather than the rhinos chosen by party elites. Do you think that government personnel and those in Congress that are not fully behind the president are affecting progress on, all of these things we just mentioned, the wall, the COVID issues?
Yeah, I mean, there's just a number of Republicans who are just holding their breath and waiting for Trump to leave office so that they can do whatever. And to me, it's unfortunate, right? We have the House, we have the Senate, yet we aren't really able to get anything done. It's been one of the least productive sessions in Congress that we've had for years, if not decades. So I think that there is that problem of the ones that aren't fully behind the president, but I think it's the ones that aren't fully behind the principles of the Conservative Party or America First principles, because there's plenty who are endorsed by Trump, who say they want to do what Trump wants to do, but they're not necessarily critically thinking and standing up more so for their people. A lot of the ones, unfortunately, when you see like, let's say a Lindsey Graham, right, endorsed by Trump, but yeah, I mean, so I think he's much more concerned about pleasing or saying or doing when it's necessary what Trump says than what's best for his state.
Yes.
And I think you see that with some other. I mean, for instance, I'm running against Jimmy Patronis. He was endorsed by Trump, but I think some of his votes aren't actually helpful. I think he's more worried about helping the establishment. For instance, there was a vote to uncover or release sexual misconduct reports filed against members of Congress. He voted to hide that in the ethics committee. And that was a party line vote, or that was a vote where I'm sure that the establishment said, hey, we need you to vote this way. Same with the FISA, right? Like FISA, we've seen Americans being spied against, and that's one where it's not always with Trump against Trump. Now, the ones that are, I think maybe there's three classes, right? There's the rhinos who were always against Trump. You have the ones that are just going to do whatever Trump says without needing to be critically thinking. And then you're going to have some that are the more critically thinking, where I'd put like a Tim Burchett or Lauren Boebert, or the ones who kind of went for who were trying to release the Epstein files, who are speaking out against, hey, maybe we shouldn't spend so much money, other things of that nature. So we need more of that kind of America First critical thinking side, and absolutely do not need the super liberal hate Trump period. I mean, Trump's a great president and probably best in my lifetime. But part of helping someone is not always agreeing and trying to steer in the right direction.
Yes, absolutely. And that's true. And I think that I meet people all the time, myself included, who are like, we support Trump because he's the best, that we have, but that doesn't mean that we're like a hive mind where we agree with everything, that he says and does, like the Democrats are with their leaders.
Well, not all of us are. I mean, there are those cat turds out there, but yeah.
Yes. Well, you mentioned this gridlock that we're seeing in Congress, and I think it's just raising to a point where people are getting really frustrated. And it may affect the voter turnout in the midterms, where people are just not motivated, not necessarily that they're going to turn to the Democrats, but they're just not. Why would I go out and vote for a Republican? What is your campaign's approach to that? How are you going to motivate voters to say, stick with us, stick with the Republicans, fight for us? Yeah.
I mean, I'm just trying to fight for this district and the things that this district needs, and for America First principles. When And I'm pointing out the hypocrisy of a lot of Republicans who are in power when they're not in power, they're on defense and they're really loud. When they're in power, they really don't do anything.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to campaign and say, look, I am going to do something. I am going to fight for you. I wasn't pre-selected by the establishment. And I have my list of priorities that Americans generally, 80, 90% want. I want to take care of the military and veterans of the area. It's the most veteran dense district in the country.
Wow.
So it deserves someone who's going to take care of them, not somebody who is going to really not know what's going on with the veterans because they're not a veteran themselves and won't even get a veteran in their district office until they're being primaried by a veteran.
Mm.
So there are certain things such as that for accountability, trying to go after the Epstein files and get those fully released and people prosecuted for that. Actually fighting for affordability, fighting to bring down the debt by not just having this outrageous spending. I think that's the biggest existential crisis that we're facing right now is $39 trillion in debt.
Yeah.
So by running on those certain platforms that Americans are very fed up about, trying to inspire people with just my personal story, the things I'm trying to fight for, just kind of the faith background, maybe not your typical politician, but someone who didn't get into politics, but politics got into them. And I think you see this kind of movement going on with some campaigns right now, especially when they're trying to primary incumbents and more establishment type folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's necessary. I think primaries are one of the most important things that we can do right now in our party because our party is unfortunately not functioning very well for the people who are putting Republicans in Congress right now. So I'm so glad that you are involved and you got in the fight. Where can people find and follow your campaign?
Yeah, so people can find me on social media. I'm on X, Instagram, Facebook at John Frankman FL. So John Frankman, Florida FL. And my website is frankmanforflorida.com. So people can go there as well, check it out. And if they're in the district, if they want to get involved in volunteer, please do so. Or if you want to help support and you're not in the district, please donate. Even if it's just $20, this is a grassroots campaign and that helps.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Sierra. I appreciate it.